This hour on I-24 News. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas focuses on France, refusing to work with the U.S. on peace with Israel. Plus, Palestinian Day of Rage protests turned deadly, with 2 killed along the Gaza border. Also, the FBI arrests a former U.S. Marine, accusing him of planning an ISIS-inspired Christmas attack on San Francisco. And the United Nations targets North Korea with tough new sanctions over the rogue nation's ballistic missile tests.
From the I-24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Clear Cut with Michelle Makori.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas wants to make it clear he does not regard President Trump as a partner in the Middle East peace process. But here's what's not clear: who, if anyone, could take his place. Well, the PA president met with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris. Abbas is upset by President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and perhaps even emboldened by a United Nations General Assembly vote denouncing Trump's declaration. Abbas is calling on France and Europe to play a greater role in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Now, on another front, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Erdogan say they both support the right of the Palestinian people to create an independent state. Both nations voted to condemn Trump's Jerusalem declaration. Now, all of this comes amid more Palestinian Day of Rage demonstrations. Protesters threw rocks and bottles at Israeli security forces on the Gaza border. The Israelis responded with tear gas and rubber bullets. 2 Palestinians were killed. Middle East correspondent Michael Pluchak has more on the violence and the diplomacy.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and French President Emmanuel Macron spoke Friday at a joint press conference. Their meeting comes a day after 128 countries in the UN General Assembly voted to condemn the United States for its move to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Abbas reiterated his walkout from American mediation.
The United States is no longer an honest mediator in the peace process, and we will not accept any plan from it because of its bias and transgression of international law.
And Macron agreed that Trump's move was misguided, but stopped short of recognizing a Palestinian state.
The Americans have marginalized themselves, and I'm trying not to do the same thing. If I thought it made sense to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state, I would, but I would never do it under external pressure.
The meeting also comes days after Abbas met with the Saudi King Salman and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. According to a state news agency, the king reassured Abbas that Saudi continues to support a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. That's a significant statement because it serves to counter reports the kingdom might throw Palestinian national aspirations under the bus in exchange for strong ties with the U.S. and Israel to counter the mutual archenemy, Iran.
Saudi Arabia, as we all know, has very strong relations with the U.S. since the 1940s. And the truth is, there is only one thing that could come between Saudi Arabia and the U.S., the Palestinian issue.
Meanwhile, Hamas's Gaza chief Yahya Sinwar is upping the rhetoric. On Thursday, in a rare televised address, Sinwar urged Palestinians to meet the Israeli armed forces in so-called friction points to create a bloody day of rage. And some Palestinians heeded the call, with more anti-U.S. rioting Friday, resulting with 2 killed in the Gaza Strip, according to Gazan health officials. This is the 3rd Friday in which Palestinian rioters took to the streets to protest Trump's declaration. While Palestinian leaders have warned the gates of hell will open after Trump's announcement, rioting was largely contained and has seen a steady decrease in the numbers from thousands in previous weeks to mere hundreds by this Friday. Michael Pluchak, I-24 News.
Well, 2 major players in the Middle East both say that they support the creation of a Palestinian state. Let's go to I-24 News correspondent Sarah Coates, live from our headquarters in Tel Aviv. And Sarah, the leaders of Russia and Turkey both making some very strong statements after yesterday's UN vote. Tell us more about what they had to say.
Yeah, they certainly did, Michelle. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has been among the most vocal critics of Trump's decision to recognise Jerusalem. He's posted a number of messages to social media and made a lot of noise over this, certainly not mincing his words by saying he expects President Trump's administration to rescind its decision without any further delay. He went on to say that despite ugly and unforgivable threats from the US, that the UN took an honourable stance and the US attitude ahead of the UN vote will be remembered in the history of democracy. Erdogan and Vladimir Putin actually caught up over the phone following this vote, and according to a statement from the Kremlin, the pair confirmed the mutual disposition to continue to assist in resolving that Palestine-Israeli conflict. Now, the two leaders have also agreed to stay in close contact regarding the cooperation of Turkey and Russia in the region. But the interesting thing about this is, while Erdogan has been very vocal about the decision, it's fair to mention that Russia has already announced that back in April that it recognised West Jerusalem as Israel's capital, yet we didn't hear much about that from Turkey back then. Michelle?
Sarah, meanwhile, we're learning more about Israel's plan to follow the U.S. and leave the UN's cultural organization, UNESCO. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. Israel has announced it's leaving UNESCO, citing the UN's cultural agency's systematic attacks on the Jewish state. Now, Israel's foreign ministry spokesman says the decision was based on the organisation's attempts to disconnect Jewish history from the land of Israel, adding that the official letter of departure will be submitted before the year's end and that Israel will leave the organisation by the end of 2018. Earlier this year, we saw the US say it would withdraw, and at the same time also cited similar reasons for that. Now, Israel's long complained of perceived anti-Israel bias within the UN, and where Israel and its allies are far outnumbered by Arab countries and their supporters. We've also seen recently a number of resolutions by the UN that have really angered many Israelis who saw them as lessening Jewish ties to Jerusalem and also to the city of Hebron. Michelle?
Sarah, thanks so much for the update. Sarah Coates live from my headquarters in Tel Aviv. Let's now bring in Matthew RJ Brodsky, a Middle Eastern geopolitical analyst with Wikistrat, and he joins us via Skype from Washington. Matthew, good to have you with us. And Matthew, the leader of Hamas, as we know, calling for a day of rage in the Palestinian territories following the UN vote on Jerusalem. Now, the UN vote favored the Palestinians. So why this reaction with a call for even more violence?
Well, the only way to get people on the streets is to basically have Hamas and have the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank try to orchestrate this as much as possible. The fact is, most of the world on the street, this doesn't really have much of an impact. But I mean, Hamas obviously, look, they want to destroy Israel. Anything that they can do to get their name in the spotlight, to be considered the hoisting the flag of Muqawama, resistance, as far as they can, then that's good. The Palestinian Authority is doing the exact same thing. This is how they play the game.
Sadly so. Matthew Abbas, meanwhile, saying that the U.S. has disqualified itself as a mediator. And I can't stress this point enough. Trump did not call Jerusalem undivided or the indivisible capital of Israel. He very clearly said that the U.S. is not taking a position on final status issues, including the specific boundaries of Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem, the resolution of contested borders, that is still up to the parties involved. Matthew, why is no one hearing this? Why is this just being tuned out?
Well, see, this is the thing. I've been writing on this, and I've been saying ever since this began, exactly what you're saying is that that's the point. And the Trump administration, what they didn't even go as far as what Congress has done in the United States. So really, it's even less of a story. But the fact is, the Palestinians get this, whereas the Europeans and these countries in the United Nations don't. The Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas, he very well understands that there's a difference between West Jerusalem that Israel had held, 2.3 miles of East Jerusalem that Jordan held and created. And everyone knows that it's 3/10 of a mile. That's the old city, the holy city. Those are actually where most of the holy sites are. They're doing this to drum this up. See, the Abbas, the Palestinian national movement, is not designed to have a negotiation with Israel. He's going to use this to try to avoid having negotiations, because to negotiate with Israel means they then have to make concessions. They're not going to make concessions. They're taught in their textbooks that they, once they were allowed to make them in the Oslo process, they're taught that the Arabs were the Canaanites, they were all the pre-Islamic civilizations. They're taught a bunch of things that are essentially contradict Islam, that contradict Arab history, essentially.
Matthew, I get that, but why is the rest of the world not actually listening to what President Trump said?
Look, the rest of the world doesn't really like Israel, unfortunately. They're idiots and left and led by, I mean, look, they don't like the United States either. When you have a den of countries that are in the United Nations that vote the way they do, constantly and very consistently, this is what you get. It's been grating on Americans' nerves for a long period of time, too. I mean, most Americans wonder what the money is that they're paying to all these countries that vote against them and to the United Nations. It's a joke.
Matthew, speaking of that money and the considerable amount of U.S. taxpayer aid that goes to the Palestinian Authority, how far do you see Abbas now taking the snubbing of the U.S., and at what point does further cuts to funding to the PA start to factor in here?
Well, the problem is they don't have an end game. See, the idea is to avoid negotiations. So if they're not going to have the U.S. in the role, then they don't have to show up to the table. And there's no other game in town. Only the U.S. can actually deliver Israel if it needed to in the negotiations. But in the meantime, there's no start. They're waiting for a starting point that concedes the return of the refugees into Israel, not into a Palestinian state, and that grants them all of the old city of Jerusalem, and all of even Western Jerusalem is apparently what they're arguing by protesting what is happening with Trump's announcement. So the end game for them is to keep kicking the can down the road because they felt that time is on their side. What Trump did with his announcement is say, I'm sorry, but the laws of physics apply here, laws of reality apply here, and we're no longer going to play by your fiction.
All right, Matthew, appreciate that analysis. Matthew Brodsky, Middle East and geopolitical analyst with Wikistrat. Thank you.
Pleasure.
The FBI is saying that an ex-U.S. Marine is now under arrest, accused of planning a Christmas terrorist attack in San Francisco. I-24 News correspondent Marcus White has the details.
This is the man who's under arrest by the FBI, Everett Jamison, a tow truck driver. The FBI says that he was planning to target Pier 39, a major attraction in San Francisco, because he knew there would be a lot of people there, and he knew he could kill a number of people. The FBI says Jamison posted radical jihadist messages on the internet. He's also accused of showing his support for the Halloween terror attack in New York City that killed 8 people. Jamison also allegedly suggested he would use his truck in an attack. The FBI says Jamison told an informant, I'm glad to know we Muslims are finally hitting back, Allah Akbar, which means God is the greatest in Arabic. The FBI complaint also says Jamison met with another undercover agent and said the U.S. needed another attack like New York or San Bernardino. The complaint said that Jamison wanted to use vehicles and firearms to carry out the attack. And on November 29th, he allegedly loved this Facebook post, an image of Santa Claus standing in New York with a box of dynamite. The FBI says that agents searched his home in Modesto December 20th and found ammunition, firearms, and a handwritten letter saying Allah Akbar. Jamison was trained as a basic recruit in the Marine Corps in 2009. Investigators say he earned a sharpshooter qualification, but he was discharged for fraudulent enlistment because he didn't reveal that he had asthma. Jamison also said that he was ready to die in the attack, according to the FBI. The FBI started communicating with him after he started to like and love posts on Facebook that were pro-ISIS and that were pro-terrorism. Michelle?
And Marcus, have we had any reaction from his family to this?
Yes, Jamison's father is speaking out. He's saying that he is just stunned by this. He cannot believe this. He says that his son was raised as a Christian, but he does believe that some trouble started to follow his son when he decided to move back with his ex-wife, and that's when he possibly tried to convert to Islam.
All right. Appreciate that report, Marcus White. Thank you. Still ahead on the show, piling on the pressure. The UN adding new sanctions to North Korea. More on the world powers standing with the United States. And last-minute business. The president signs his tax cut before the holiday break. We'll look ahead to a busy January for the White House.